Hi, I'm Brian, or Fat Dad from Fat Dad Woodshop. Sometimes it's in woodworking, it's not about what you can make, but what you can make better. Fat Dad Woodshop. So what I'm making today are handles for crochet hooks. And I don't crochet, but my daughter does, and a few other members of my family do. And the way that you hold a crochet hook, as I understand it, is to hold it here on this flat surface with your forefinger and your thumb, and you wrap your hand around it and you work your crochet that way. And I guess a downside of one of these crochet hooks is that this very thin diameter right here, if you're holding that with these bottom part of your hand for long periods of time, your hand will tend to cramp up after a certain number of hours of crocheting, which tends to happen a lot. So what I've done here for my daughter is I've taken some of her crochet hooks and I have put a wooden handle on there to more fill your hand so that you can more ergonomically crochet for longer periods of time without your hand cramping up like that. So this is a technique that can be used on anything that has a round shaft, something like a prick punch or a scratch awl or a center punch or anything like that. Anything that you want to put a handle on that has a cylindrical shaft like this one. Now, the crochet hooks are nice because they have a measurement already on them. Now, most of them are metric, and this one happens to be a 3.75 millimeter diameter shaft. And as I'm in the United States, I don't really deal with millimeters all that often, so I don't have a lot of metric drill bits. So one of the hardest parts of this is finding a drill bit that matches the diameter for your hook that will fit so that you can drill out the hole for this handle. And the good news is that the glue makes up for a lot of the space, and all you need is something that's pretty close. So if you're within a 64th of an inch or so, which is a very small amount, the glue will make up for it and it'll hold it quite nicely. So I happen to be using a 5/32 of an inch diameter drill bit, and as you can see, those are very, very close. And just to make sure, I drilled a test hole in this piece of scrap wood, and as you can see, that slides in and out of there fairly nicely. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a real tight fit. My daughter would like me to make her handles all out of acacia wood. And if you're an avid Bible reader, you will find that acacia is actually mentioned in the Bible. It is a very pretty wood. It sands very smooth and it works pretty nice. But acacia does not grow in Wisconsin. So this is kind of a little trick that I found for a cheap way to find acacia. And that is to go out and buy yourself a inexpensive side grain cutting board at one of these box stores. And the fact of the matter is that you can buy a finished out the door cutting board at a box store for small projects like this cheaper than you can find acacia wood in at least in the area that I'm in. So you take this, and I just squared off a piece of it so that it's the same dimension both directions. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put that in my vise. I'm going to find the center on one end, and I'm going to use that to line it up on my lathe, and I'll drill a hole for this. And then after that, I will shape the outside of the handle, and I'll have my handle. And it's a pretty simple little project that works really nice, and it really helps out your loved ones if they use something like a crochet hook. The blank itself doesn't have to be all that large. These don't take all that much to fill up the inside of your fingers like that. And I just cut it a little bit longer than the handle I need so that I can put this end in the chuck. Now, if you don't have a chuck, there's other ways of attaching this to the headstock on your lathe. You can drill and tap a hole in the end here, and start with a little bit bigger blank, and drill and tap a hole in the end for something like a screw chuck, or you could glue this into a board and put a faceplate that attaches to your headstock. And there's multiple ways of attaching this. It doesn't need to hold all that tight because you're not really putting this under a huge amount of strain, but of course you do want it tight enough where it doesn't go flying off when it's spinning in your lathe. But I'm going to use a 4-jaw chuck, so I will show you how that method is used. Now you can probably see here that I've got my blank all ready. I found the center on this blank, and that's going to locate on my tailstock here. I've got my live center tailstock put in the tailstock, and on my headstock I've got my 4-jaw chuck. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my blank, put it inside the jaws of my 4-jaw chuck here, and I'm just going to get this barely snugged down. So there's just barely holding that in place. So it still moves a little bit. And I'm going to slide my tailstock up until my live center hits that little spot that I found on with my center punch. And now that is all centered up. And what I'm going to do is really tighten down my chuck really good. So I know that that's not going to come slipping out of there. And I'm going to go ahead and dent that right into the wood because I don't want that blank to come flying out of there. And I'm not worried about this part of the wood that's in there anyway, because it doesn't matter because the rest of the handle is going to be made out of this part here. So I'm going to spin this around and make sure everything is set. And I'm going to kind of eyeball the blank as it's spinning around and make sure that's good and centered. And then I'm going to move my tailstock out of the way and replace it with my chuck, which has my drill bit in it. And then I'm going to drill my center hole out immediately out of the center of this, so that I know that my my hole will be in the center of the project. Now I'm going to run this in, and I'm going to just back it out every once in a while, because you don't want those chips to build up inside that drill bit, because heat is definitely the enemy of your tools. So I'm just going to run this in and out there, and let those chips just clear out of that flute. And what I'm definitely not going to have enough length on my tailstock here to drill this entire hole out. So what I'll have to do is stop halfway once this has done its full length here. That's about it. I'm going to have to shorten this up and slide this in a ways. Now I've got this set so that if I bottom that chuck out, that my hole will be the correct depth. So that's drilled out all the way now. So now I've got my live center back in my tailstock here, and I'm just going to very gently set that inside that hole, and it'll just set in there a little ways. And I'm just going to lock my tailstock down, and now this will turn between centers, and now I can just turn the outside shape of this to whatever I need it to be. I'm just going to make this just kind of a general oval shape, and that's going to hit. So I'll make this a pretty simple oval shape out of this blank, And that's a pretty good thing too. I should mention, you always turn this by hand to make sure it's not going to smack your tool rest. But there's enough room in here where I just have to make sure I don't cut back until I hit my chuck. And I'm just going to make this into a general oval shape, and I will know that the center of that hole will stay in the center of my handle as long as I don't cut too deeply. So I'm just going to get this where it's round. See, if you run that on the back of your tool there, you can kind of feel whether it's round or not, and that's pretty good actually. That's a pretty good cylindrical shape. So I'm going to just take that down just a little bit more. And the other thing I'm doing is I'm watching the shadow on the top here. I'm not watching where the tool is. I'm watching on the top because I can see the shape of the wood as on the top better than right where the tool is. Now I'm going to take this down. On the two ends here. And I'm going to be careful to keep my tool out of that chuck. So I'm keeping an eye on that carefully. And I'm just going to put two little ramps on there. And then most of the rest of the work I'm going to do, that was the roughing tool. Most of the rest of the work I'm going to do with my smoothing tool, which surprisingly enough, it smooths everything out. So I'm just going to run this in here and get this into a roughly ovoid shape. Until it looks the way I want it to look. And then I'm going to bring this down out here till it's close, but it's not completely cut off on that end. And that's something that really doesn't take you very long to do. And now that that's cut, that's pretty much the shape that I wanted. I'm going to get my tool rest out of the way here. And this sawdust tends to build up and really get in your way. And then I'm just going to give this thing a sanding here. And I'm going to start with 180. And I'm going to keep that sandpaper moving, so I'm not putting any grooves or tracks in the handle. And then in between each grit, I'm going to stop and I'm going to turn this by hand and go across, just so I'm not leaving any marks with the sandpaper. And I'm going to do that with every grit. So we're going to go from 180 to 240. And you really don't have to spend a huge amount of time with each sandpaper. And get that. Now we got 320. And then 400, I think, is sufficient for a project like this. 400 is on the high side for a lot of things like handles. And yeah, that's pretty good. So I'm going to put some Danish oil on this, and then we're going to cut it off of there, and I'm going to do a little bit of finishing sanding, and it'll just about be ready. So here comes the Danish oil. This is a paper towel, not a rag. because we don't want to have an accident and have this yanked in there. And that oil is sure pretty when it first goes on there. And I'm just going to let that spin for a second, because that helps to dry the Danish oil a little bit, or that's something I just do anyway. We'll get this stopped here. So that's really pretty. So now I'm going to get my my tool rest back in place. And I'm going to spin this by hand and make sure that nothing's hitting before I actually turn that on. And then I'm going to get my smoothing tool out again, because I found that the tip on this thing works really good for taking that off. Now you notice that the majority of my project is this side of the headstock. So I'm cutting it over here. You never want to cut your project off near the tailstock. You want to cut it off at the headstock, because if you do that, then all of the power that's spinning that will suddenly be cut off, and that won't violently get flung. See, it just dropped out of there. And now that Danish oil's probably got a bunch of sawdust in it, but that's okay, because Danish oil is pretty resilient stuff even when it's wet. So I'll just wipe that off, and if I have to, I'll apply a little more Danish oil. But there's just a little more work to do, and this thing will be done. Now I dug this out of that lathe, and it's none the worse for wear. All you had to do is wipe the stuff off and put a little more Danish oil on it, and it's just fine. And as you can see, the hole is still in the center, and that just slides right down into it just the way I want it to. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to refine that tip, because that's where I cut that off with the smoothing tool. And I'm just going to take some sandpaper, and I'm just going to keep that sandpaper moving with the 80 grit first. And then I'm going to work this down to until it's got a nice round shape on the bottom here, and there's no weird high spots or any sharp edges or anything like that. Then I'll switch over to some 120. And then we'll switch to the 220. And I could hit this with 400 if I felt like it, but that's actually pretty good. And then I'm just going to dab a little more Danish oil on there. And I'm going to make sure that there's Danish oil on the end, on this end too. And then I'm going to pretty much just let this dry. Now, that's actually a pretty handy use for the dog holes. The other thing that you can do is, I like this, this JB Weld. For some of these kind of operations. It grabs onto the metal and to the wood quite well. It also seems to hold onto the cap pretty well. This gel type glue tends to fill up the cavities, and you don't need a heck of a lot in there. And then you just run this down and give that a good twist while you're putting it in there. And this JB Weld glues really fast. In just 5 or 6 minutes, that thing will be just as hard as it's ever going to be. So that'll be in great shape. So that is all you really need to do to put a handle on something like a crochet hook. Pet Dad Woodshop.